Good evening, everybody. It's so great to see you all here. Thanks so much for coming and getting on the computer tonight for how to teach multiplication facts that stick. I'm Kate Snow. I'm a math educator and mom, and I'm very excited to be with you tonight to talk multiplication facts. So first, I'll just do a little audio or a little introduction to what you'll learn tonight. So I'm trying to hit all the basics tonight of what you need to be able to teach the multiplication facts well to your kids. You'll learn when to teach your kids the multiplication facts, what's missing from most drill that a lot of parents do, and frankly, a lot of schools do as well. The core of what I want to talk about is 5 simple steps for teaching the multiplication facts. And then as part of that, I'll be showing you how to make the multiplication facts concrete and visual for your kids, to make them less abstract, less rote, to make them easier to understand and easier to memorize. So since you're here, I'm guessing that you understand that the multiplication facts are important. You probably wouldn't, get in front of the computer on a Thursday night to think about math if you didn't think they were important. But just in case you're kind of wondering, or just to help you kind of remember your purpose here, I wanted to show you some of the different things that your kids are going to need the multiplication facts for as they get into middle school and high school math. In algebra, when they have these polynomials to factor, they're going to need to use the multiplication facts. When they're adding and subtracting fractions, not to mention multiplying and dividing, they'll need lots of multiplication facts to find those common denominators. When they're dividing with decimals or doing percentages, they'll be using the multiplication facts. And finding areas, this is the formula for an area of a circle. When they're finding volumes, those are all core concepts that require multiplication. And when kids don't know the multiplication facts, they end up using all their working memory on figuring out the multiplication instead of learning the new content, the new ideas that they need to be learning. And so when you spend the time helping your kids learn the multiplication facts, you're just giving them a foundation for all of this middle school and high school math. You're going to make that math so much easier for them because they know the multiplication facts. So it's well worth your time, and tonight we're going to be getting into exactly how to do that. But you might give me a couple questions just off the top of your head, and I wanted to make sure to address those right at the beginning. So first of all, what ages is this for? I'll get into this in a little bit, but in general, kids should learn the multiplication facts in about 3rd grade or so. But if your child is older than that and hasn't learned the multiplication facts, it is not too late. This is definitely a case where better late than never. Whenever your child learns the multiplication facts, it will help him for the rest of his math education. The approach I'm going to be showing you is one that works with 3rd graders who are just learning it for the first time. It works for 4th and 5th graders who perhaps have learned a whole bunch of the multiplication facts but are still having trouble with like the 7s, 8s, and 9s, some of those harder ones. And it also works for older kids, even kids as into 7th or 8th grade who just have not gotten the multiplication facts down or never quite were able to get a handle on them. This applies for all those ages. So whatever age your child is, you will not be wasting your time working on the multiplication facts with your child. You might also be wondering, how much time does this take? If you are a homeschool parent, you are busy. You have lots going on. Usually, it takes kids, I'd say, about 15 minutes a day for 5 days a week for about 10 weeks to get the multiplication facts down. And now I know that is a significant amount of time, but it is an investment that is well worth it. Like I was saying before, when kids don't know the multiplication facts, they have to spend a ton of time working them out every single time that they do a new topic that involves multiplication. And so I think of the multiplication facts kind of like sharpening the saw. This is a metaphor from Stephen Covey's what's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he tells a story of 2 lumberjacks going out to saw some wood. One just takes his dull saw and goes out and starts sawing away. The other one takes some time to sharpen his saw before he begins sawing the wood. And of course, after he's sharpened the saw, it goes much faster and it's much easier to get all of the wood cut. Well, the multiplication facts are kind of like sharpening the saw. taking the time to do it makes all the rest of math faster and easier. And another question you might be wondering, this is one I hear from parents a lot, what if I'm not very strong in math myself? I know a lot of parents didn't get very good math educations and don't feel super comfortable teaching math. But you're here tonight, and that is an awesome first step if that's how you feel. I'll be giving you an overview of how to teach multiplication facts in a way that really sticks for your kids. And then I've also put together a book. My book is Multiplication Facts That Stick, that gives you more detail. It takes all of these principles I'm going to be teaching you about tonight, and it lays them out in scripted lessons with games, with worksheets, so that you can put it all into practice. It's open and go, so you can just pick it up and read it. And you might even learn something along with your kids if math is an area that you don't feel especially strong in. And as you have more, I bet you'll have more questions as I talk. You may have even thought of some more already. But if you do, you can put them in the comment box that's over in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. I know some of you have found it already. There's this little, first of all, you might have to click on a little like purple little arrow thing there. And then once it opens up, there's this say something box. If that isn't showing for you, you can click on that little speech bubble, and then it will show up for you. I am not going to be looking at the comments while I'm talking, because otherwise I get super distracted and then I don't make as much sense. So I'm going to try to stay focused on what I'm trying to tell you. And then at the end of the time, then I'll take a look at the comment box and answer the questions that you have. So please feel free to put questions in there as you have them, and then I'll get to them at the end. You might also, if you have questions that someone else can answer, you might see Melissa Moore from the Well-Trained Mind Press popping in there. If you have questions about the books or anything like that, you might see her in there as well as a moderator. So take a look for that too if you just have a quick question that she can answer. All right, so that's the kind of the basics here, and let's go ahead and dig into it. So first of all, what are we talking about when we say the multiplication facts? I consider the multiplication facts all of the multiplications from 1 times 1 equals 1 up to 10 times 10 equals 100. There are 100 of these multiplication facts to memorize, and this is a full multiplication table showing all of these. So it is a lot of information for children to learn by heart. Our goal for our kids is for them to be able to recall all these multiplication facts from 1 times 1 up to 10 times 10 in about less than 3 seconds. And I give this as a general guideline. It really depends on your child what this optimal time is. If you have a child who's tends to process information very quickly, can respond very quickly to questions, you should probably try to go for less than a second to be able to say 7 times 6 and have your child just shoot back at you 42. But some kids are slower processors, and they're just always going to need a little bit more time to take in that 7 times 6, to kind of just let it work through their minds and to have that 42 bubble to the surface and come out. So I like to give 3 seconds as kind of a general guideline that most kids should be able to say just about all those facts in less than 3 seconds. You'll find some variation. Of course, some of the 7s and 8s might take a little bit longer for kids to pull back than some of the easy ones like 3 times 2. But that's the general goal. And then as to when, as a general guideline, I suggest that by the end of 3rd grade is a good time for kids to have mastered the multiplication facts. That's typical for American curricula. And generally, if a child has learned it by the end of 3rd grade, then they're well prepared to get into division and long division and fractions in 4th grade. But one caveat to that, if your curriculum moves at a different speed, you certainly want to be teaching the multiplication facts when your curriculum is expecting them. One key exception for homeschoolers, for example, is Singapore math, which does a lot of the multiplication facts in 2nd grade. And so if you're using the Singapore math, the primary mathematics series, or their new dimensions math, you want to be having your child memorize the multiplication facts along with their curriculum so that they're well prepared for starting 3A when they'll need to be able to use all those multiplication facts. And then related to that, so if the goal is to have all the multiplication facts learned by the end of 3rd grade, related to that is the idea of when should you start? Well, there's 2 key prerequisites for kids before they learn the multiplication facts. First, you should make sure that you've taught your child the concept of multiplication before you aim for her to memorize all the multiplication facts. And by that, I mean you've spent some time, you've gotten out manipulatives, you've said, okay, 3 times 2, what does that mean? It means 3 groups of 2. You've acted that out with counters, your child has used skip counting or adding to find the answers, and understands very well what that multiplication sign means. The other prerequisite for learning the multiplication facts is knowing the addition and subtraction facts first. Your child won't really need to use much subtraction and only some addition in learning the multiplication facts, but this is kind of the orderly progression. You know, addition is the first set of facts to memorize, subtraction builds on addition, and so that comes next, and then multiplication comes after that. If your child doesn't have addition or subtraction down, I'd say to do that first before you go to multiplication, even if you're already past 3rd grade. Build that foundation in an orderly way, and you'll get to the multiplication facts before you know it. And so now I want to get into, so now we know what the goal is and when to start. How do we actually go about teaching the multiplication facts? So lots of wonderfully well-meaning parents and teachers in schools as well say, okay, it's time to learn the multiplication facts. That means it's time to get out the flashcards. Or these days it might mean getting an app, another option, and saying, okay, here you go, honey. Go ahead and memorize these multiplication facts. And so wonderfully patient and persevering parents will start with this stack and drilling some every day, or making sure to schedule time on that app every single day so that the child gets working on those multiplication facts. But there's a few problems with this approach. If the multiplication facts aren't presented in a sequential, orderly, and logical way, it can take a long time because each fact then feels like a separate piece of information. If you've ever tried to memorize a bunch of discrete little bits of information, you know how hard it is. Like, for example, memorizing 100 vocabulary words in French or 100 dates in a history class. It takes a lot of drill to get to the point where you can get all 100 bits of information into your head. And it feels very overwhelming because it's so much to learn. And so when kids just kind of get tossed into the deep end with multiplication facts, just given kind of the whole stack to start to learn, or go into the app and it just starts throwing all the multiplication facts at them, they feel overwhelmed. And speaking as a parent, I know that when my kids feel overwhelmed, it's not pretty for them, it's not pretty for me. And so it's something we want to avoid as much as possible, and especially in math, which is a subject that kids can feel overwhelmed in anyway. Another drawback of just tossing the whole stack of flashcards at a kid is that the child learns to memorize rather than to understand. It is possible, if you are dogged enough at practicing, it is possible to memorize all the multiplication facts without really understanding what they mean or how they relate to each other. But when kids do that, they're missing out on getting that deeper understanding of what the concept of multiplication is really about. And that makes it harder for them to apply multiplication to word problems, to more complicated math that they'll be doing in the future. And this is the worst part. I feel like this is just so terrible when you spend all this time on the multiplication facts, that then if they're memorized, they're often not retained. I'm sure you've also experienced this sometime in your life when you've crammed for a test and you've gotten all that information there, you've memorized, and then 2 weeks later, it's just poof, it's gone. These multiplication facts are so important. Kids need to retain them so that they'll have them at their fingertips for all those harder math topics. And so we want to make sure that kids learn them in a way that does really stick. And like I said, this is when parents do this, especially when they really follow through on doing all of this practice, I know that they're doing their very best for kids. They're doing what they think is right, but they're missing just this key piece. When they go straight to practice, what they're missing before that is really teaching. We can't just practice when we practice information without having it taught to us, without learning it first, it really is just this huge, overwhelming chore to practice, practice, practice. And so now we're going to get into what does this teaching look like? How do you actually teach the multiplication facts rather than just practicing the multiplication facts? So what I've done is I've broken this into a 5-step process. I'm a very linear person. I kind of like to think of tasks in chunks. And I think it's a lot easier to think of this as just a 5-step process so you know exactly what to do. The first step is very simple, and that is just to choose one table to work on. So if you look at this entire multiplication table here, this is the whole thing. And one table is just one column. When we say a multiplication table, we're talking about one column in the entire multiplication table. So for example, the 4s are 1 times 4 equals 4, 2 times 4 equals 8, and so on up to 10 times 4 equals 40. And so choosing just one to work on at a time helps to make it more manageable for kids and help them to feel less overwhelmed. However, because multiplication is commutative, that just means we can multiply in any order, you get this bonus that while you're working on the 4s, you're also practicing the 4 facts that are within every other table. So you're also practicing 4 times 1 equals 4, 4 times 2 equals 8, down to 4 equals 10 equals 40. And so by picking just one table, it's 10 facts to work on, but you're kind of getting a bonus in that you're getting both a row and a column of the full table that you're working on. So once you've made it more manageable by choosing one table to work on, the next step is to make the facts concrete and visual. I said when I was saying what to do before you tackle the facts, I said that you should get out those hands-on manipulatives and make sure your child understands that times means finding groups, like say 3 groups of 2, for example, for 3 times 2. But when it comes to the bigger facts, this concrete and visual piece can be kind of difficult because, counting out 6 groups of 8 could take a long, long time. And so instead of counting it all out with hands-on materials, and then you've got all these little groups and all these little things all over the table, and then your toddler comes and steals some, and it doesn't help very much. I prefer to use a simple printable called the dot array. And this might look familiar. It looks a bit like the multiplication table, but you can see that in place of the answers, there are these dots. So this part over here on the left is one sheet of paper. That's the dot array. And then this gray L over here is what I call an L cover, and it's a separate sheet of paper. And don't worry, you'll be getting an email with both of these printables from Well-Trained Mind tomorrow so that you'll be able to print out your own. And I also have copies of these on my website. I'll give you that address at the end of the presentation. But so the beauty of these 2 pieces of paper is that when you put them together, you can show any multiplication fact from 1 times 1 equals 1 just by sliding the cover. So if you imagine the cover going over here, it would block out all the rest of them. You'd only see, oh, 1 times 1 has 1 dot. Or if you wanted to show a bigger multiplication fact, let's say you wanted to show 6 times 8. What you'd do is you'd slide the L cover on top of the dot array so that 6 rows of 8 are showing. And so you can see here's this 6. So there's 6 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I should have done that from the top down, but you can see the 6 rows. And then each of them has 8 dots in it. So this shows 6 times 8, and the number of dots in there is then equal to the answer to 6 times 8, which is 48. So by using the L cover with the dot array, you're able to really show your child how many dots is 6 times 8. What does 6 times 8 mean? And in fact, you can even then take this and rotate it to see that, oh, and this is also the same as 8 times 6. If we look at it tilted, we can see that, oh yeah, here's our 8 columns, and each of them has 6 dots in it. So it also helps to illustrate why 6 times 8 equals 8 times 6. So this is this step now. We've picked a table to work on. We have made it visual and concrete with the dot array. And then the next step is to use stepping stones to figure out the answers. And this is really one of the most important parts of this process. If you think about stepping stones when you're out for a hike, you know, stepping stones are those little stones in the river that you can take little steps to get across the river instead of trying to cross the whole river in one giant leap. And that's what stepping stones do in multiplication. Instead of making the giant leap towards figuring out 6 times 8, you can get there through a couple of steps. And so here's how that works. Most kids learn the fives really pretty easily. And so we can start with using the L cover to show 5 times 8. In here we have 5 groups of 8, and 5 groups of 8 is 40. So that's our stepping stone. Okay, now we want to figure out what 6 groups of 8 is. So we have our 5 groups of 8, which is 40, and then we have one more group of 8, which is 8. So 40 plus 8 then equals 48, which is the answer to 6 times 8. I'll go through that one more time because I know that's a lot of abstract math thinking here. And I wish I could show you with the actual L cover, but it doesn't work so well on slides here. So we have 5 groups of 8, which is 40. We add on 8 more to find that 6 groups of 8 is 48. And so that's the stepping stone approach, where you use an easier fact to help you figure out a fact that is harder. When children are first using a stepping stone approach, it can be a little time consuming because they have to think through every one. But as they get more practice with it, then they start to, it starts to become more automatic to the point that they'll just know it and get that answer automatically. And so these are these benefits of stepping stones. It builds a deeper understanding of what multiplication means because kids are thinking deeply about what exactly 6 times 8 means. Oh, it's 6 groups of 8. I can take 5 groups and add one more on. Another benefit is that we remember better when our new information is connected to old information. So the stepping stones approach keeps the multiplication facts from all being separate little facts, and it weaves them all together and interconnects them. And then another major benefit of this is that it provides a child a way to quickly figure out the answers if he or she forgets. You know, children will sometimes forget things, but this way they have a fallback plan, a way to figure out that answer, and they're not just completely stuck if they forget an answer to one of the problems. And so that was step 3 of using stepping stones. And there are stepping stone strategies for all of the different tables in the multiplication table, I should say. I didn't want to go through every single one of those tonight because I thought that would make this a little bit long. But I do have an article on my website that goes through those strategies more often. And then also in Multiplication Facts That Stick, there's lessons that take you step by step through all those stepping stone strategies for all of the multiplication tables. So moving on to step 4 here. Once we've taught children how to use stepping stones to figure out answers, the next step is to practice the table by itself. If we've chosen to work on the 4s, to just work on the 4s all by themselves for a bit, so that your child can really concentrate on using that stepping stone strategy and learning that one table at a time. And then there's lots of different ways to practice. And I find that most kids really learn them best when you use more than one way, when you're using a variety of things to tackle them from different angles. One way that's kind of fallen out of favor, but I find super effective, is plain old recitation. So saying 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8, 3 times 4 is 12, and having your child recite the table that you're working on. One of the main benefits of that is that, of course, your child is hearing it and saying it, so you're using a different learning style. But also having to generate the table himself, to have to think through how each one builds on the previous, how each equation in the table builds on the previous equation. It helps your child understand, like, oh, when I say the fours, I'm adding a group of four each time I go up a next step in the table. Helps make that really clear. And but when kids have to generate content rather than just respond, it also helps them to think about it more deeply. It's a little bit harder to come up with a whole table on your own instead of filling in a table. And so recitation can be a great way to practice whatever table you're working on. If you're familiar with my work, you know I love games because they provide such a fun way to drill multiplication facts or any kind of math really in a way that feels lighter, it feels more fun, and also gives you a chance to really pay attention to how your child's thinking, to see how fast they're working, and to correct any mistakes they have right away. Now, worksheets, of course, are also a good way for kids to practice multiplication facts, because with worksheets, they're getting that written practice that they'll be using throughout their written work in their math education. Excuse me. And then lastly, it's fine at this point then to bring in flashcards or apps and to work on one table at a time. And with flashcards, you can simply pull out all the facts that go with the table that you're working on. And there are some apps where you can choose one table at a time, but you have to look for that and you have to look in the settings. So those are some ways to practice for the table that you're working on. So if we go back to the 5 steps for mastering multiplication, we're now up here to step 5. And this is mixed practice. Once the child has mastered the table by itself, then you can mix it up with the facts that your child's already learned and let them practice them all together. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. There we go. And so once you're ready for the mixed practice stage, then you can use all of those same practice tools that we were talking about before: recitation, games, worksheets, flashcards, or apps, but this time with cumulative review of all the facts your child has learned, rather than just focusing on one table at a time. And so those are these 5 steps. And like I said, these each go with, so you can see that these 5 steps are all for one table. You go through these 5 steps with each table, mastering one table at a time, and then mixing that table with the facts that your child has already learned, and going through each table until your child has learned them all. But then that, of course, raises the question, what order should you teach the timetables? So, excuse me one second. So this is my favorite order for teaching the times tables. And I'll go through this a little bit quickly. I didn't want to go through every single one, but just wanted to give you an idea of what things to think about in teaching the times table and what orders to use. So first of all, let's start with the easiest, with the times 1, 6 times 1, 7 times 1, where those are all very easy. Next, times 2 builds on that, where children can learn to just double the number that they're multiplying times 2. So 7 times 2 is 14. All you have to do is double the 7. The times 3s build on the times 2s because you can take the times 2 answers and add just another group. And then times 4 comes after that because it can build either on the times 3s or on the times 2s. You can use either of those as stepping stones. Then I like to do the times 10s next, which skips ahead a lot, but most kids find the times 10s very easy to learn because they can use place value. So if they're doing, for example, 10 times 7, they can just think, oh, well, 10 times 7, that's going to be 7 tens, so that's got to be 70 because of what they know about place value. After that, I like to go to the times 5s, where kids can all think of putting together groups of 5s to make a 10. The 6s then can use the 5s as a stepping stone. The 9s, I like to use the 10 as a stepping stone for that. And then once you've done all of those, it only leaves a very few couple of facts at the end. By the time you've been through all of the other facts, there's just a couple 7s and 8s because your child, for example, has learned 9 times 7, 6 times 7, 5 times 7, and 10 times 7. And so it leaves just a very few of those really tricky ones then to master, again with stepping stones. And so what I've done with multiplication facts that stick is I've taken these 5 steps for teaching the multiplication facts, and I've put them all together into an open and go curriculum that will allow you to teach your child the multiplication facts this way. What it provides is for each table, there's a scripted lesson, there's 5 games, and worksheets to practice the new tables and provide some cumulative, or actually a lot of cumulative review. It's over 400 pages. There's a lot packed into this book. I recommend doing 1 week per table. Like I said earlier, it's about 15 minutes per day, 5 days per week. But if you find that your child needs more time or less time, you are your child's teacher. You know your child best. You should always adjust based on what you're observing and seeing in your child, not holding to anybody else's artificial timeline. So within the book, there's scripted open and go lessons for each of the tables. You can see a little bit of that dot array with the L cover in there. So it shows you exactly how to use the L cover, shows you exactly kind of what to write out, how to have your child answer the question with suggested wording. There's also 5 games each week. It's the same 5 games each week. And I did it that way because I wanted the children to experience a gradually increasing level of challenge across the week. So each week there's a game that starts where all of the answers to the multiplication problems are in order and they're visible on the page. So as the child is first learning the table, the child can actually see the answers printed on that game. But then as they progress through across the week, it changes. There's a game, so we spend 2 days using this board in a couple different ways. Then there's a 4 in a row. It's a bingo type game where all the answers are printed, but they're mixed up, so the child has to take it up another level. There's a roll and cover game that focuses just on the 6 through 10s of every table. So for example, if you're doing the 6s, it'd be 6 times 6, 6 times 7, 6 times 8, 6 times 9, and 6 times 10, because those are often facts that need a little bit of extra work. And then finally, there's a card game here at the end of the week where your child needs to recall all the answers and none of them are printed on the game boards. But like I said, all of these are no prep games. You just pull them right out of the book, and you don't need any special materials, just a colored little blocks like Legos or counters of some sort for game pieces. You need a deck of regular cards and some dice, and that's it. And then also, there's 10 practice pages per week to go with each table for both the focused review of the table of the week as well as cumulative review. And the practice pages include a variety of formats. There's just filling out multiplication tables where they're all in a row. There's multiplication grids. And then there's also both horizontal and vertical multiplication problems so that kids get used to solving multiplication in a variety of different ways. And so that's the key components of multiplication facts that stick. Printed books are available at Amazon.com. They're also available at welltrainedmind.com. And if you prefer to buy your books, you can also get the PDF at welltrainedmind.com. It's a really great money saver if you have a big family, because then you can print out however many copies you need of everything for all of your kids. We don't offer this one a Kindle version. It tends to not print very well. So if you do prefer digital, you want to definitely go to welltrainedmind.com. So that is the main part of my presentation, how to get this entire multiplication table into your child's head, memorized, mastered, and able to be recalled within 3 seconds so that your child is well prepared for moving on to all of these middle school and high school math topics that they'll need to use multiplication for. I hope that you've learned a lot tonight about how to teach your kids multiplication. I see we have some questions here from a few of you, and so we'll move here into a question stage. Please feel free to put your questions into the comment boxes if you have questions. And as I said before, there's that purple arrow in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And then there's also a little chat balloon there that you might need to click to get access to that, that little chat box. And one question that I just want to make sure I answer before I get to your questions is how to combine this with a curriculum, whether or not you should stop your math curriculum to teach the multiplication facts. And in general, I think that for multiplication fact instruction and all math fact instruction really, it's better to have consistent short lessons than to do a lot each day. So what I'd suggest you do if you want to work on the multiplication facts with your kids is to spend about 15 minutes a day at the beginning of your math time working on multiplication facts. Set a timer if you need to, stop after 15 minutes, and then just go back, use your regular curriculum for the rest of your math lesson time, however long that is. It's okay if you only get through half a lesson, but because the multiplication facts are such a great use of time, such a good investment in your kids' math education, that I think it's well worth it. So I generally don't suggest stopping your curriculum entirely, but just trying to use some of your math time each day for the multiplication facts. So I see a question here from Amy that her kids are struggling with memorization. So she says, this approach helps with the concept, but will it help with memorization? And yes, so Amy, I know it can feel like that's a great question because we want our kids to memorize the multiplication facts. We don't just want them to understand the concept, although that's important too. But we also want them to have these totally automatically down. But this approach does help with memorization as well. It starts with that conceptual basis so that kids have a lot of, that they have that full conceptual knowledge to fall back on. But by thinking this through over and over, they get faster and faster at the memorization. And so the two things really work together. And then once you add that conceptual piece to all of the practice, they get faster and faster at recalling it. So if you think about those games, the worksheets, that's the sort of the vehicle then that helps your child go through that conceptual process and get faster and faster at remembering the answers. And let's see, so another question is from Gina. Excuse me, I have quite a frog in my throat tonight. So Gina says, we love your books. I'm glad to hear that, Gina. I'm using the multiplication book now with my 10-year-old to help him become more solid with the facts as I slowly begin to teach division. It seemed that if I didn't slowly move towards division, he was feeling discouraged. His math facts have improved dramatically this year, but I'm wondering your thoughts about whether I really should not begin division until he has them all mastered in the 3-second time frame. Balancing proficiency and self-esteem is not always easy. Oh, that is so true, Gina. And so in general, I would say that you don't want to have your child try to master the division facts until he has the multiplication facts down. By master, I mean you don't want to be pushing him to recall those division facts within that 3-second time frame until he has the multiplication facts down already, because knowing the division facts really relies on already knowing multiplication. However, that does not mean that you can't do any division until he has multiplication memorized. And especially if you feel like this is important for his self-esteem, his self-confidence, and his overall attitude towards math, I would say go for it. Start that division, keep on working on the multiplication, but don't let it be a barrier towards something he's interested in and something that makes him feel like he's really making progress in math, because that's really important too. It's an important thing to also make sure that that we're keeping in mind. You know, sometimes we don't want to let the ideal be the perfect be the enemy of the good. Want to let the good be the good. And so Hillary says, what do you advise for children with learning disabilities like dyslexia and poor working memory issues? So what I would say for children who have trouble with working memory is that you do need to expect that this process will take longer. There's a huge range in how fast kids learn anything. And for children who have trouble with working memory, it will take a little bit longer, but it's still well worth putting in the time. If you find that your child is really taking a very long time to learn the multiplication facts, I do recommend that you use a printed multiplication table so that you can continue moving forward in your curriculum while you're still working on the multiplication facts. Kind of like what I was saying to Gina, it's important that children do memorize these, but I don't want children to ever feel held back because they don't know them yet either. And so if your child does have working memory issues, I do suggest using that multiplication table for your child to refer to as you move forward in your curriculum, but that you keep on spending time practicing the multiplication facts as well. Overall, this approach of helping kids understand what they're doing, seeing it visually, and helping it all make sense is very helpful for kids with dyslexia or with dyscalculia. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong, dyscalculia. And so it's worth the effort, even though it does take extra effort when you have a child who struggles in that way. So Chai says, I had started my daughter on addition fact practice using a 2-line 10 frame. Before seeing your videos, I was able to convert addition and subtraction practice using the 2-line 10 frame. But I'm wondering how I can change your multiplication methodology into this 10 frame. So honestly, Chai, that's part of why I do use, so for people who haven't seen my addition or subtraction books, I use a visual that's somewhat similar to the dot array. It's kind of like the top 2 lines of the dot array, and use that for helping kids visualize addition and subtraction. And so you could certainly, and so what Chai's asking is whether you can use like a 2x5 grid rather than the 1x10 grid to represent multiplication. You could certainly use 2x5s and make those up and then have your child kind of use those, but they really don't work quite as well. But I think children are pretty flexible, and sometimes using different representations is actually good for them because it helps them to think more flexibly and understand a topic more robustly. And so I would actually suggest not worrying about it. I don't think you need to convert it because I think your child will probably be able to make the change pretty easily. Amber's asking, what addition facts do children need to know before starting the multiplication facts? I suggest making sure they know 1 + 1 up to 9 + 9, because from that, then they can work from there. It really helps too if children can add a 1-digit number to a 2-digit number so that they're able to use those stepping stone facts for the larger numbers. But within multiplication facts that stick, I actually include lessons on that so that children can access that, develop those mental math skills, and then use those mental addition skills to build towards the multiplication facts. If you search on my website too, I have a game for practicing that called, it's called Race to 100. It's the mental addition version. One other question that I often see is about skip counting, or often people ask me how skip counting relates to this approach. And skip counting, which is just teaching kids the number sequences, so for example, 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, learning those is a wonderful way for kids to understand that multiplication means adding equal groups. But I see a lot of kids become reliant on finger counting as a result. So for example, to figure out 6 times 7 to go, okay, I need 6 groups of 7, so I'm going to count those out. 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42. The answer is 42. That can really become kind of a crutch that kids get stuck on, which is why I do encourage, if you have a finger counter or a skip counter, that using the dot array can be very helpful to help them see how can we use a fact that's closer. Instead of starting from the very first fact, starting counting at 7, could we start at, hey, let's start at 5 times 7 is 35, and then add another group of 7 on to there. Christine says, my kids have really struggled getting past the stepping stone phase. We've been using a similar method, but they seem to always skip count all the way up or take the longest possible way to get there, like three-step process to figure them out, if not really increase their speed for figuring out the answers. And so I think there is a little bit of patience involved, unfortunately, Christine, in helping them get there, and just in kind of constantly reminding, well, was there a faster way you could do that? How could you do that without skip counting? And then giving them lots of practice so that they do have lots of opportunities to keep on recalling those answers. I think using a variety of methods also will help to speed up that process. So if you're using, for example, like all worksheets to add recitation, to add games, add some multisensory components so that that recall gets a little bit faster, hopefully a little bit more quickly for you before you lose patience entirely. So Jessica asks, if you use Singapore math, when would you start multiplication facts that stick? So Jessica, I recently posted about this on my Facebook page, and I'm trying to make sure I get the levels right. But if I'm remembering correctly, what you'd want to do is use basically the first half of multiplication facts that stick in 2A. That's when Singapore does the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And then you would use the second half of multiplication facts that stick with 2B when Singapore does like this 5, 6, 7, 8, 9s, and 10s. That varies a teeny bit by edition, but that's the general approach. So really to just match the tables to what you're doing in Singapore. Singapore provides a great conceptual introduction to multiplication. And so basically after you finish that multiplication chapter, that's when I'd start multiplication facts that stick to make sure your child really memorizes the facts that were just introduced in Singapore. Now this is a great question. If you're from Holly, if your child has an incredible memory and it's difficult to tell if they have a real understanding, should we linger or just rejoice in the memorization and move on? Oh, that's a great question, Holly. That's a good problem to have. I'm sure there's lots of moms and dads here who would love to have that problem. Definitely rejoice in the memorization. Don't feel like you need to beat a dead horse of making sure that you've gone through every single one. But I would definitely spend some time figuring out ways if you can kind of get around that memorization and ask lots of why questions to make sure your child does understand what they're doing. So like, if I didn't know that 6 times 7 was 42, how would you explain it to me? What if I got stuck knowing 8 times 9? How would I figure that out? Could you explain to me how I could do it? So those why questions can be really good for assessing kids' understanding and probing a little bit more to make sure that they are getting the underlying concepts. Question from Michelle, what should your kids have covered or know before they start using addition facts that stick? So this is one of my other books. For addition facts that stick, all the children need to know is they need to be able, of course, they need to know the numbers from 1 to 20. They need to understand the concept of addition. And they need to have just a little bit of understanding of place value with the numbers in the teens. So for example, that 13 is 10 and 3. But other than that, they don't need to know any other addition facts before starting that book. It starts from the very basics of adding 1 plus 1 and works your way up from there. So Ash is asking about Math-UC, which is another homeschool math curriculum. And she says, as far as using Math-UC that utilizes manipulatives, would you say the diagram you use replace usage of those manipulatives? I think really you could go either way with that, Ash. I think it certainly can. The diagram's a lot more efficient than having to fish out the right colors of blocks. And so I think the diagram, but they're very complementary. It's a very similar representation, so I don't think your child will have any trouble going back and forth between the two representations. Certainly use the colored blocks from Math-UC for teaching the concept of multiplication. They're great for that. But once you get to actually mastering the facts, you could switch over to this visual. Michelle, hi Michelle, it's great to see you. A couple people here took my class at the Well-Trained Mind Academy, and it's fun to see them again. So Michelle said, I'm just starting this book week 1 with a number of 3rd and 4th graders. I follow the script and find it wonderful. Oh, great question here. Is it important to stress that the first factor in a multiplication refers to the number of groups, and then second, the size, and will this help with part of a measurement division? Great, so Michelle is getting all fancy here for you guys. She's learned a lot in my Well-Trained Mind Academy course about the division, but what she's asking, I'm going to flip back here in my slides just to show you an example. It's going to take me just 1 second to find it. Sorry, it's flipping back here. So she's saying when we have 6 times 8, I present in the book that 6 times 8 means 6 groups of 8. And so here we can see that there are 6 rows and each has 8 dots in it. So is it important that we're consistent about that, that the 6 refers to the number of groups and that the 8 refers to the quantity within each group? I try to be very consistent with that in the book just because I define it that way. But you do not need to be picky about that in your lessons with your students. In fact, you want to help them understand that 6 times 8 and 8 times 6 mean the same thing. Michelle, you'll actually get to a lesson on that pretty soon on rotating the dot array so that they see that. And so what I would focus on is them understanding that there are equal groups and that the equation tells us how many groups there are with what number in each group, but don't worry too much about whether it's the first factor or the second factor. Because a lot of math books actually do that different ways. I went through a whole bunch of different math curriculum when I was writing this book to decide which way to do it. And it's really about half and half. Some do it this way and some do it the other way. So either is fine. What matters most is the overall meaning. Crystal asks, where do we go to access the dot array and the L cover? Great question, Crystal. I'm going to go here to show you my website. 1 second. So my website is right here at kateshomeschoolmath.com. There's a search bar at the top. If you search for dot array, it should come right up in the search results. But if you signed up for this seminar through the Well-Trained Mind Press's website, you'll receive an email tomorrow that will include a recording of this, your own dot array and L cover, as well as a multiplication facts assessment that you can use with your own kids. So you can see where they're at, and then it is also keyed to multiplication facts that stick. So you can see exactly where to start in multiplication facts that stick for kind of the most effectiveness and to work efficiently. Holly asks, what's the best overall math program? Price is not an issue, just end results. What produced the most mathematically sound thinker? I'm afraid I can't answer that one, Holly, because it does depend so much on what suits a child. A curriculum that might produce a wonderful mathematical thinker in one child might be a total bust for another child. And so, unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all answers. But I see you've gotten some responses that I do have lots of reviews on my website at kateshomeschoolmath.com. So take a look there, and you can learn about 5 of my favorite programs and who I think they're best suited for. And so hopefully that will help you find what will make your child as mathematically sound a thinker as possible. And regarding Right Start, yes, Right Start is a program that I used with my own kids for several years and loved. It has lots of great things about it. Teaches a lot of mathematical thinking, uses a lot of manipulatives, a lot of games. It is also very expensive. It's also very, very parent time intensive. And for some people, the spiral format drives them bonkers. So definitely take a look at my review of Right Start on my website. Again, if you go to kateshomeschoolmath.com and do the search in the top bar, if you search for Right Start, you'll find my review of their program as well as others. Well, we are coming up here on 9 o'clock. You guys have had some great questions. Thank you all so much for being here. I wanted to I'm so thankful also to the Well-Trained Mind Press for hosting this tonight and making this all possible. I see we have one more question. Okay, we'll do one last one. I'm currently using Right Start for my daughter in first grade. I've purchased addition packs that stick. Would you recommend incorporating that into our schedule for the next 6 weeks? This week, Right Start introducing some larger addition problems. I'm wondering if we should master the basic facts first. I'd recommend, like I said, with the multiplication, just spend 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of your lesson doing addition facts that stick, and then continue with Right Start. If you find that your daughter is having lots of trouble with those larger addition problems, then yeah, it's probably a good idea to pause. But if she's doing okay with them, keep on going with your curriculum, use addition facts on the side, and in 6 weeks or so, she'll be have them mastered and be ready to move on. Okay, so I will really close it at that point. Thank you all so much for attending. Next week on Thursday at 8, I'll be doing a Division Facts That Stick webinar. You'll receive information on that from Well-Trained Mind Press if you signed up for this one with Well-Trained Mind Press. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been a pleasure spending the evening with you. Hope you have a great night and happy math.